My name is Alexandra Sterling, and I'm 29 years old. Last December, I stood outside my childhood home in suburban Chicago, watching my entire family celebrate Christmas through frosted windows because my parents decided my unconventional lifestyle wasn't appropriate for their traditional holiday gathering. The envelope I slipped under their door that snowy evening contained an invitation that would cost them their reputation in our elite social circle and completely redefine what family means during the holidays. Before I share what happened that night and the shocking aftermath, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with stories about creating your own family when blood relatives fail you. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what your holiday traditions look like. Drop it in the comments below. Now, let me take you back to that December evening when everything changed between my parents and me forever. The Sterling family Christmas Eve party had been a tradition for over 2 decades. Every year, our Tudor-style mansion in Winnetka would transform into something from a holiday magazine. Crystal chandeliers draped with evergreen garlands, a 14-foot Fraser fir in the living room, tables groaning under the weight of my mother's famous prime rib, and grandmother's china that only came out for special occasions. This wasn't just any holiday gathering. This was the social event of the season for Chicago's North Shore elite. Doctors, lawyers, executives, old money families whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings. The guest list read like a who's who of suburban royalty, and my mother, Catherine Sterling, took immense pride in hosting what everyone called the Christmas party of the year. I'd been attending this party since I was old enough to wear velvet dresses and shake hands with adults. 29 years of forced smiles, appropriate conversations, and playing the role of the perfect Sterling daughter. But this year was different. This year, I'd done something that, in my parents' eyes, had disqualified me from their version of respectable society. The driveway was already packed when I arrived at 6 p.m. sharp December 24th. Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas lined the circular drive like expensive ornaments. Through the tall windows, I could see the warm glow of the party already in full swing. Women in designer cocktail dresses, men in their best suits, champagne glasses catching the light from the chandelier I'd helped decorate every Christmas morning for as long as I could remember. I smoothed down my emerald green silk dress, custom made, though my parents would never know that, and walked up the familiar stone pathway. The wreath on the front door was new this year, more elaborate than usual. Mother always outdid herself when she was trying to prove something. The door opened before I could ring the bell. My father, William Sterling, stood in the doorway wearing his traditional Christmas Eve burgundy velvet jacket. His face, usually warm and welcoming during the holidays, was set in stone. Alexandra. His voice was cold, formal, the way he might greet a business associate he didn't particularly like. Dad, Merry Christmas Eve. I held up the gift bag I'd brought, filled with carefully chosen presents for my parents, my brother Marcus, and his wife Jennifer. Can I come in? He didn't move from the doorway. Behind him, I could hear the party in full swing. Laughter, clinking glasses, the piano player my mother hired every year performing Christmas classics. The sounds of belonging, of celebration, of family. I'm afraid that won't be possible. The words hit me like ice water, even though I'd been expecting them. For the past 6 months, ever since the news broke, our family conversations had grown shorter, colder, more strained. But some part of me had hoped that Christmas, our tradition, would be sacred enough to overcome their disappointment. Dad, it's Christmas Eve. It's our family tradition. Traditions are for families who share the same values, Alexandra. What you've done, the choices you've made, they don't align with what the Sterling family represents. I could see past him into the house I'd grown up in. The grand staircase where Marcus and I used to slide down the banister when our parents weren't looking. The living room where we'd opened presents every Christmas morning. The dining room where I'd learned proper etiquette. where I'd been taught that appearances mattered above all else. What I've done? You mean building a successful business? His jaw tightened. You know exactly what I mean. The newspaper article, the publicity, the embarrassment you've brought to our family name. 6 months ago, the Chicago Tribune had run a feature story about young entrepreneurs disrupting traditional industries. My company, Sterling and Associates, had been highlighted as one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the Midwest. But it wasn't the business success that had scandalized my parents. It was how I'd achieved it. You're talking about the article where they called me one of Chicago's most innovative business leaders under 30? I'm talking about the article where they mentioned your unconventional approach to networking, your clients, the reputation you're building. My unconventional approach. That's what my parents called it when I'd built my business by working with industries they considered beneath the Sterling family dignity. Cannabis companies going legitimate, tech startups run by college dropouts, influencers and content creators they didn't understand, but who were revolutionizing marketing. While my Harvard MBA classmates were fighting for positions at traditional consulting firms, I'd seen an opportunity in the emerging markets that old money Chicago was too conservative to touch. I'd built a client base of entrepreneurs who needed legitimate business strategy but couldn't get meetings at the established firms because their industries were too new, too unconventional, too risky, and I'd made a fortune doing it. These people, my mother's voice came from behind my father, sharp with disdain. They're not our kind of people, Alexandra. Catherine Sterling appeared beside her husband, resplendent in her holiday burgundy velvet gown that matched his jacket. She looked like the perfect society hostess, which is exactly what she'd spent 30 years perfecting herself to become. Our kind of people? I kept my voice level, though my heart was racing. You mean successful people? Innovative people? People who are actually changing the world instead of just talking about it at cocktail parties? I mean respectable people, she snapped. Do you have any idea what Margaret Whitman said to me at the country club? Her son saw you in that article, photographed at some marijuana dispensary ribbon cutting, a Sterling at a drug establishment, a cannabis company's grand opening. I'd helped them develop their business strategy, and they'd invited me to their launch event. It had been completely legal, completely professional, and incredibly successful. Within 6 months, they'd expanded to 3 locations. Mother, cannabis is a legitimate business industry. My clients are not the type of people we associate with. My father's voice was final. The Sterlings have a reputation to maintain. Your grandfather built the Sterling name in this community. I've spent my entire career upholding it, and I will not have you destroy it with your ventures. Behind them, through the house, I could see the party continuing. Familiar faces from my childhood, family friends, the social circle I'd grown up in. They were all there, celebrating tradition, belonging, acceptance. Everything I was being denied. So what are you saying exactly? My mother lifted her chin, the gesture I'd seen her make countless times when she was about to deliver what she considered necessary discipline. We're saying that, until you reconsider your business choices, until you start conducting yourself in a manner befitting the Sterling family name, you're not welcome at family gatherings. The word reconsider hung in the air between us. They wanted me to abandon the business I'd built from nothing, to walk away from clients who trusted me, from a company that was thriving, from the first thing in my life that had ever been entirely my own achievement. You're banning me from Christmas. We're protecting our family's reputation, my father said. And frankly, Alexandra, we're protecting you too. The path you're on, the people you're involving yourself with, it won't end well. When you come to your senses, when you're ready to build a respectable career, we'll be here. A respectable career. Like Marcus, who worked at my father's law firm handling estate planning for their wealthy friends. Like Jennifer, who'd quit her teaching job too. Plan charity galas for the country club set. Like every other person inside that house, living lives that met with parental approval and social acceptance. I looked past them one more time at the warm light, the celebration, the belonging I was being denied. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the cream-colored envelope I'd been carrying. Well, since I'm not welcome at your Christmas, I wanted to make sure you got your invitation to mine. I handed the envelope to my mother, who took it automatically, her confusion evident. Consider it a Christmas gift. You'll understand everything once you open it. I turned and walked back down the stone pathway, past the expensive cars, away from the house where I'd learned that love came with conditions and acceptance had a price. Behind me, I heard the door close with a finality that echoed across the December night. As I drove away from my childhood home, I thought about all the times my parents had used their disappointment as a weapon. It had started small when I was younger. The pursed lips when I chose art classes over cotillion. The heavy sighs when I dated boys who weren't from appropriate families. The lectures about living up to the Sterling name whenever I showed interest in anything that didn't fit their narrow definition of success. College had been 4 years of constant pressure to choose the right major, join the right sorority, date the right type of men. Harvard Business School had been their idea, not mine. They'd seen it as a path to respectability, to the kind of career that would make them proud to introduce me at parties. But even with my MBA, even with the success I'd achieved, it still wasn't enough because I'd done it the wrong way. I'd succeeded with the wrong people, in the wrong industries, using methods they didn't approve of. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Mom said you stopped by but didn't come in. Everything okay? Marcus, my younger brother by 3 years, who'd never questioned a single expectation our parents had placed on him, who'd married his college girlfriend at the country club, honeymooned in Europe, bought a house 6 blocks from our parents, and produced 2 grandchildren right on schedule. I typed back, "Ask Mom and Dad. They'll explain." The truth was, Marcus lived the life our parents had wanted for both of us. Predictable, respectable, approved. He worked at Dad's firm, socialized with the right people, belonged to the right clubs. His wife hosted book clubs and organized school fundraisers. Their Christmas cards featured perfectly posed family photos in matching outfits. He was everything I wasn't, and for years I'd felt like a failure because of it. But sitting in my car outside my childhood neighborhood, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I didn't want their life. I'd never wanted it. I'd just been conditioned to think I should. My phone rang. Marcus calling. "Alex, what happened?" "Mom won't tell me. Anything except that you made some kind of scene." "I didn't make a scene. I was uninvited from Christmas because they disapprove of my business." Silence on the other end. Then, "Surely it's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. They think my clients aren't respectable enough for the Sterling family name." "Well?" Marcus's hesitation told me everything. "Some of your business associations are a bit unconventional." Even Marcus, even my own brother thought I should be ashamed of my success because it didn't look the way they expected success to look. Unconventional or successful? Both, I guess. Look, you know how they are about appearances. Maybe if you just changed everything about my business to make them comfortable? Compromised a little. There are other clients you could work with. More traditional companies. Traditional companies that would never have given me a chance as a 24-year-old MBA with no connections and no trust fund. Traditional companies that were still operating the same way they had for decades, while my unconventional clients were changing entire industries. "I have to go, Marcus. Merry Christmas." I hung up and drove home to my penthouse in River North, the apartment I'd bought with money I'd earned from clients my family was too embarrassed to acknowledge. As I rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, I thought about the envelope I'd left with my mother. Inside was an invitation, printed on the finest paper money could buy. Alexandra Sterling cordially invites you to Christmas Day celebration at Sterling Estate, 1247, Lakeshore Drive, December 25th, 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Casual elegance requested. RSVP, regrets only. But it wasn't just any invitation. It was an invitation to the $10 million lakefront estate I'd purchased 3 months ago. The estate I'd bought with cash from the sale of my business to a Fortune 500 company that had recognized what my parents couldn't, that I'd built something revolutionary. The same business they'd been ashamed of had just made me wealthy beyond anything the Sterling family had ever achieved. And tomorrow, everyone who mattered in Chicago was going to find out exactly how successful their embarrassing daughter had become. If you've ever been rejected by people who should have supported you, you'll understand what happened next. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button. It really helps share these important messages about creating your own definition of success. Now, let me tell you about the Christmas celebration that changed everything. The Sterling Estate was something I'd dreamed about since I was a child. Sitting on 3 acres of Lake Michigan waterfront, the 1920s mansion had been built by a railroad baron who spared no expense. 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a ballroom with crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I'd fallen in love with it the moment I saw the listing, but at $10 million, it had been completely out of reach. Until 3 months ago, when Paramount Consulting Group made an offer for my company that I couldn't refuse. $50 million for Sterling and Associates, with a 5-year consulting contract worth another $20 million. They didn't just want my client list. They wanted my approach, my insight into emerging markets, my ability to bridge the gap between traditional business and revolutionary innovation. The closing had happened on a Tuesday morning in October. By that afternoon, I'd made an all-cash offer on the estate. By Friday, it was mine. My parents still didn't know. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear, with fresh snow covering the estate grounds like powdered sugar. I stood in the master bedroom, looking out at Lake Michigan, drinking coffee from bone china and planning the day that would change my family's understanding of success forever. My phone had been buzzing since 8 a.m. with RSVPs, not regrets, acceptances. Apparently, word had spread through Chicago's social circles about Alexandra Sterling's mysterious Christmas invitation to an address that had everyone curious. Margaret Whitman, the country club gossip who'd scandalized my mother with news of my cannabis client, had RSVP'd yes. The Hartfords, who owned half of downtown Chicago real estate, were coming. Even the mayor had confirmed attendance. They were all coming to see what the embarrassing Sterling daughter was up to now. My event planner, Sophie, arrived at noon with a team of 30 staff members. I'd hired the same company that handled premieres for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. If my parents wanted to judge based on appearances, I'd give them something to judge. Miss Sterling, the caterers are setting up in the kitchen, the florists are finishing the arrangements, and the string quartet is tuning in the ballroom, Sophie reported, her efficiency impressive even by my standards. The photographer from Chicago Magazine should arrive around 2:30. Chicago Magazine. I'd arranged for them to cover the party as part of a holiday entertaining feature. My parents would see themselves and their friends celebrating at their unsuccessful daughter's $10 million estate in next month's society pages. Perfect. And the special delivery? Arrived this morning. It's waiting in your study as requested. The special delivery was my Christmas gift to my parents, something they'd understand the value of, even if they didn't understand me. Guests started arriving at 2 p.m. sharp. I positioned myself in the grand foyer, receiving them as they entered. The expressions on their faces as they took in the estate were priceless. These were people accustomed to luxury, but the Sterling estate was something special even by their standards. Alexandra, darling. Margaret Whitman swept in wearing enough jewelry to fund a small country. What a stunning home. I had no idea you'd moved to the lake. Thank you, Mrs. Whitman. I'm so glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Though I must say, I was surprised to receive your invitation. Your mother mentioned you were between residences. Between residences. That's what my mother had told people about my living situation, as if I were some wayward child crashing on friends' couches instead of a successful businesswoman with a downtown penthouse. I've been keeping the estate private until now. Today seemed like the perfect time to share it. More guests arrived in waves. Business leaders I'd worked with, society figures who knew my family, journalists and influencers who represented the new guard of Chicago power players. I'd deliberately mixed traditional old money with emerging influence, creating exactly the kind of guest list my parents would never have dared attempt. By 3 p.m., the estate was filled with the sound of celebration. Champagne flowed in the ballroom where couples danced to live music. The dining room featured a spread that would have made my mother weep with envy. Everything from traditional holiday fare to exotic dishes prepared by Chicago's most sought-after chefs. In the library, I'd created a quiet space for conversation, complete with a roaring fire and comfortable seating. The walls were lined with first edition books I'd been collecting since business school, and the coffee table held perfectly arranged magazines including the latest issue of Forbes featuring my company on the cover. That's where my parents found me at 4:30 p.m. I saw them before they saw me, standing in the doorway looking like deer caught in headlights. My father wore his best navy suit, the one he reserved for the most important occasions. My mother was resplendent in cream-colored cashmere, her jewelry understated but expensive. They looked exactly like what they were, old money trying to maintain relevance in a world that was passing them by. Alexandra. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. I stood up from the leather armchair where I'd been chatting with the CEO of Chicago's largest tech incubator. Mother, Dad, I'm so glad you came. They stepped into the library, their eyes taking in every detail. The Persian rugs that cost more than most people's cars, the crystal decanters filled with whiskey that was older than I was, the casually displayed awards and recognitions from business organizations they'd never heard of. This is, my father started, then stopped. My home, I finished simply. Would you like a tour? For the next 30 minutes, I walked my parents through the estate, watching their faces as they took in the master suite with its lake views, the chef's kitchen with professional-grade appliances, the home office that was larger than most people's apartments. In each room, we encountered my guests, business leaders who greeted my parents with respect, but deference to me. Society figures who complimented them on raising such a successful daughter. Journalists who asked for quotes about my achievements. The reality was sinking in. I wasn't just successful. I was more successful than anyone in our family had ever been. The business they'd been embarrassed by had made me wealthy enough to buy an estate that dwarfed their suburban mansion. We ended the tour in my study, where I'd been saving the best revelation for last. I have something for you, I said, walking to my desk and picking up a thick portfolio. Your Christmas gift. My mother opened it with shaking hands. Inside were architectural renderings, construction plans, and a letter of intent from Chicago's most prestigious private school. What is this? She asked. Plans for the Sterling Center for Entrepreneurial Education, a $5 million donation to establish a program teaching business innovation to underprivileged students. I paused, watching their faces. It's being funded entirely through the proceeds from my business sale. The business they'd been ashamed of was now funding the largest charitable donation our family had ever made. Their embarrassing daughter was about to have a building named after the Sterling family at one of Chicago's most respected institutions. My father sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. You sold your business to Paramount Consulting Group, They're implementing my strategies across all their Fortune 500 clients. I handed him another document. This is the press release that goes out tomorrow. It mentions the Sterling family's commitment to education and innovation. The Sterling family name, which they'd been so concerned about protecting, was about to be associated with forward-thinking philanthropy instead of old money stagnation. My mother was crying now. Not the delicate tears of a society lady, but the raw emotion of someone who'd realized they'd made a terrible mistake. Alexandra, we didn't know. We had no idea you were successful, wealthy, making a difference. I kept my voice gentle but firm. You didn't know because you never asked. You were too busy being embarrassed by my methods to notice my results. My father looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than disappointment in his eyes. We were wrong. You were scared, I corrected. Scared of change, scared of anything that didn't fit your definition of success. But the world changed while you were trying to preserve traditions that don't matter anymore. Through the study windows, we could see my guests mingling on the terrace despite the December cold, champagne glasses in hand, laughing and celebrating. Representatives of old Chicago mixing with new Chicago, traditional money learning from innovative thinking. The people at this party, I continued, they're the future of this city. Some of them are cannabis entrepreneurs, some are tech innovators, some are influencers and creators. They're all people you would have been embarrassed to associate with 6 months ago. But they're also the people who are actually changing the world. My mother wiped her eyes carefully, mindful of her makeup. We've been foolish. You've been human. Change is scary, especially when it challenges everything you've been taught to value. I sat down across from them, my voice softening. But success isn't about maintaining appearances anymore. It's about creating value, solving problems, building something that matters. My father reached for my hand, something he hadn't done since I was a child. Can you forgive us? I looked at my parents, these people who'd shaped my childhood, who'd given me advantages I was grateful for, who'd also nearly convinced me that their approval was more important than my own achievements. There's nothing to forgive, I said finally, but there are things to learn. Over the next hour, I introduced my parents to my world, not as the embarrassing daughter seeking their approval, but as the successful woman I'd become. They met my clients, learned about the industries I worked in, discovered that the people they'd been afraid to associate with were actually remarkable human beings building remarkable things. Margaret Whitman, the country club gossip, spent 20 minutes talking to the CEO of the cannabis company, fascinated by the science behind their products and the social justice mission of their business model. The Hartford family, old money real estate, found themselves in deep conversation with a 26-year-old app developer whose platform was revolutionizing how people found housing. My brother Marcus arrived at 6 p.m. with Jennifer and their children, having finally worked up the courage to see what their unsuccessful sister was up to. I watched his face as he took in the estate, the guests, the obvious success I'd been quietly building while he'd been following our parents' prescribed path. Alex, he said, pulling me aside in the conservatory where my florist had created a winter wonderland of white orchids and evergreen. This is incredible. All of this? It's really yours? Bought and paid for with money I earned from clients Mom and Dad were embarrassed by. He shook his head in amazement. I feel like such an ass. We all feel like asses. You were building this empire while we were worried about what people at the country club thought. You weren't asses. You were products of your environment. Mom and Dad raised us to value their approval above our own achievements. It took me years to unlearn that. Jennifer joined us, looking stunning in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but somehow seemed modest in this crowd of true wealth and influence. Alexandra, I owe you an apology, she said. I supported their decision about Christmas. I thought they were protecting family values. What family values? I asked, not unkindly. Excluding people who don't meet arbitrary standards? Judging success by appearance instead of achievement? Valuing reputation over relationships? She didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one. The values they'd been protecting weren't actually valuable. As the evening wound down, I found myself back in the library with my parents. The party was still going strong in other parts of the house, but we'd retreated to this quiet space for a conversation that was 29 years in the making. "I'm proud of you," my father said simply, "not because of the money or the estate or the recognition. I'm proud because you had the courage to build something meaningful despite our lack of support. I'm proud because you proved us wrong," my mother added, "about success, about respectability, about what matters. You've shown us that tradition without innovation is just stagnation." I looked around the library, at the books that had taught me to think differently, at the awards that recognized achievements they'd never understood, at the windows that looked out on the lake where I'd found peace in building my own definition of success. "I don't need you to be proud of me," I said finally, "but I'd like you to be part of my life going forward. The real version of my life, not some sanitized version that makes you comfortable." My mother reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. "We brought you a Christmas gift. It seems inadequate now, given everything, but..." Inside was a key, an antique silver key on a delicate chain. "It was your great-grandmother's," she explained, "the key to her jewelry box. She was the only entrepreneur in our family until you. She started a millinery business in the 1920s, quite scandalous for a woman of her social position." I'd never heard this story. "What happened to the business?" "She sold it when she married your great-grandfather. Family pressure. Social expectations. She regretted it for the rest of her life." My mother's voice was quiet. "She always said she should have kept the key to her own success." I fastened the chain around my neck, feeling the weight of the antique key against my chest. "Thank you. For this. And for coming tonight. Thank you for inviting us. For showing us what we almost lost." As my parents prepared to leave, my father paused at the library door. "The Christmas invitation, the one you left last night. Was this always your plan?" I smiled. "I bought this house 3 months ago. I've been planning this party for weeks. The only variable was whether you'd be celebrating my success or mourning your missed opportunity to support it." He nodded slowly. "We chose correctly then. Better late than never." "Much better." The last guests left around 10 p.m., but not before the photographer from Chicago Magazine had captured dozens of photos of Chicago's elite celebrating at the Sterling estate. The article would run in February with the headline, "New Money, Old Values: How Alexandra Sterling is Redefining Success." I walked through the empty house, still decorated with thousands of dollars worth of flowers, still sparkling with crystal and candlelight. In the ballroom, the musicians were packing up their instruments. In the kitchen, the catering staff was finishing the cleanup. In a few hours, it would just be me and this beautiful house I'd bought with money I'd earned doing work that made a difference. My phone buzzed with messages throughout the night. Thank you notes from guests, interview requests from journalists, business inquiries from people who'd been impressed by what they'd seen. But the message that meant the most came at midnight from my mother. "Thank you for teaching us that love shouldn't have conditions. Merry Christmas, darling. We love you exactly as you are. Exactly as I am. Not as they wanted me to be, not as they thought I should be, but as I actually am." I stood on the terrace overlooking Lake Michigan, wrapped in a cashmere throw, watching the moonlight dance on the water. Somewhere in Winnetka, my parents were probably lying awake thinking about everything they'd learned tonight. Tomorrow, they'd wake up in a world where their daughter wasn't an embarrassment but an inspiration. The truth was, I'd never needed their approval to be successful. but having it felt like the missing piece of a puzzle I'd been working on for years. Not because it validated my choices, my achievements had already done that, but because it meant I could stop carrying the weight of their disappointment. Christmas morning brought fresh snow and a house that felt different somehow. Bigger, yes, but also warmer. My assistant had arranged for a cleaning service to restore everything to perfection, and by noon, the estate looked as pristine as it had before the party. I spent the morning in my study, reading the coverage that was already appearing online. Chicago Business Journal had run a piece about my sale to Paramount. The Tribune Society columnist had written about the holiday party of the season. Forbes had picked up the story about the Sterling Center donation. My phone rang at 1 p.m. Marcus. Alex, I've been thinking all night about what you said. About being products of our environment. And I want to change. Jennifer and I, we want our kids to grow up valuing achievement over appearance, innovation over tradition. We want them to be like their aunt. Their aunt. Not the family embarrassment, not the cautionary tale, but the example they wanted their children to follow. I'd like that too, I said. Would you? Would you consider letting me work with you? I know I don't have experience in your industries, but I'm a good lawyer, and I'm willing to learn. Marcus, who'd spent his entire career in our father's shadow, was ready to step into the light. Send me your resume. We'll talk. The afternoon brought more calls. My parents, checking in and asking if they could visit during the week to see more of the house. Business associates who'd heard about the party and wanted to discuss opportunities. Journalists requesting interviews. But the call that surprised me came at 4 p.m. from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Miss Sterling. This is David Hartwell from the Chicago Tribune. I was at your party last night and I'd like to write a feature story about your journey. Not just the business success, but the family dynamics. The story of building your own definition of success despite traditional expectations. A feature story, in the city's most respected newspaper, about choosing authenticity over approval. What angle are you thinking? The changing face of Chicago success. How young entrepreneurs are building wealth and influence in industries their parents' generation doesn't understand. You'd be the centerpiece, but we'd include others as well. A story that would reach hundreds of thousands of people, many of them dealing with their own struggles between family expectations and personal dreams. I'm interested. When do you want to meet? As I hung up the phone, I realized something had shifted. The party hadn't just been about proving my success to my parents. It had been about claiming my place in a larger conversation about what success means in the modern world. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie, my event planner. Chicago Magazine wants to feature the estate in their April issue. Interior designers are calling, asking who did your Christmas decor. You've started something. I had started something. Not just a successful business or a beautiful party, but a conversation about the courage to build a life that doesn't fit other people's expectations. That evening, I sat in the same library where I'd had my breakthrough conversation with my parents. But instead of entertaining guests or proving points, I was simply enjoying the space I'd created for myself. The books I'd chosen, the art I'd selected, the view I'd earned. My laptop was open to emails from potential clients, business partners who wanted to collaborate, organizations that wanted me to speak about entrepreneurship and innovation. The success I'd built in spite of my family's embarrassment was opening doors I'd never imagined, but more importantly, I was opening doors for others. The Sterling Center would help hundreds of students learn that success doesn't have to look traditional. My story, once it was published, would reach people who needed to hear that their dreams were valid even if their families didn't understand them. I thought about the key hanging around my neck, my great-grandmother's reminder that keeping control of your own success is worth more than anyone else's approval. She'd given up her entrepreneurial dreams for social acceptance and regretted it for the rest of her life. I'd almost made the same mistake. The difference was that I'd learned the lesson in time to change course, to build something meaningful instead of something acceptable, to create my own definition of family celebration instead of accepting exclusion from someone else's. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in my $10 million estate, check on my $70 million business deal, and continue building an empire that my parents were finally proud to be associated with. Not because they'd changed their values, but because they'd learned to expand their definition of what success could look like. Christmas had always been about family traditions, but sometimes the most important tradition you can start is the tradition of being authentically, unapologetically yourself. If you've made it this far, you understand that sometimes the most powerful gift you can give yourself is the freedom to succeed on your own terms, even when the people closest to you can't see your vision. What dreams have you been afraid to pursue because they don't fit someone else's expectations? Have you ever had to choose between family approval and personal authenticity? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this message resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that their version of success is valid, even if it looks different from what their family expected. Remember, success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you have the courage to build something meaningful, regardless of who understands it. Subscribe for more stories about choosing authenticity over approval and building your own definition of family celebration. The holidays aren't about perfect traditions. They're about celebrating the people who see your worth and building new traditions with those who support your journey, even when that journey looks nothing like what anyone expected.